I was appointed soon after the EU referendum in the UK. That's 8 years ago this week. Time flies when you're having fun. I was given the role because the NFU in England and Wales representing farmers decided to set up a special unit to manage all of the fallout from Brexit because of the massive impact it was going to have on farmers in the UK. And I was brought in to head that up. And you might be surprised, my name, Nick von Westenholz, it's not a typically English name, but soon after I took up that role, I had an interesting experience. Might illustrate a little bit farmers' approach to Brexit. I had a farmer in Oxfordshire, and he went to an event organised by the NFU to discuss Brexit, what it would mean for farmers, what the NFU was going to do about it. And he met a neighbour of his there, an old farmer, someone he had known for a long time. And this guy said, well, the NFU have set up this unit. It's very good news because it's going to be really important, really big impact on farmers. And they've appointed a new director as well, which I think absolutely is the right thing to do. But guess what? They've only gone and appointed a bloody German. So that was one of my very first experiences on coming into the role. But as I say, we are 8 years on from the referendum and 4.5 years from the last general election in December 2019 in the UK, which was really the Brexit referendum. Boris Johnson came forward and said, "You elect me to get Brexit done." That was his 3-word slogan for that. And he was elected with a big majority. It was a resounding affirmation for him to get Brexit done. So that was 4.5 years ago. And of course, we now have an election next week. So of course, the campaigns and the news is full of Brexit at the moment. Everybody's wondering, did he do what he was going to say he was going to do? Has he delivered Brexit? Has it worked? That's nonsense. Brexit is hardly mentioned in the general election campaign back in the UK at the moment. It's a sort of elephant in the room. Nobody wants to talk about it. And of course, it's because it was such a success that we don't need to talk about it. It's very clear that it's all worked out. It's all worked out well. Look, the question, is the grass greener in the UK for farmers? The easy answer, the simple answer is it's not. And I'll give you some examples of how Brexit has made things quite difficult for UK farmers over the last 4.5 years. But that won't be the end of what I've got to say. The most obvious area is around trade with the EU. The EU is a hugely important market for agri-food. It's our biggest single market by some distance. And of course it is. It's 450 million customers right on our doorstep, relatively affluent. The UK, having been a member of the single market for so long, is set up to trade over that short distance in agri-food. So we have seen a clear negative impact on exports in agri-food and indeed imports as well. A report this week from the Centre for the LSE, for London School of Economics, was very interesting, looking at the impacts of Brexit on trade. And it found that actually, while there were negative impacts, they weren't as bad as some had predicted originally, but they were particularly bad for goods trade and in particular for small businesses. So actually, they found there's almost no negative impact now, 4 years on, for big businesses trading in agri-food. Exports have just about got back to where they were, but there's been a 30% reduction for small businesses. And they reckon about 20,000 small businesses exporting goods to the EU are no longer doing so. So big negative impact there. You look at some other areas that have impacted farming. We've moved away from the Common Agricultural Policy, removing direct payments, but we haven't really introduced the new replacement schemes. So farmers have seen quite a big loss of income. They've lost their old support system and the new system hasn't come online. It's basically an administrative cock-up really by the UK government. Slowly that's getting better, slowly that's coming forward, but at the moment so far it's definitely had a negative impact. Freedom of movement ending, labour, there's been some big issues with trying to access seasonal labour, in particular horticulture, fruit and veg growers, poultry producers, that sort of thing. And then finally international trade policy, where in our wisdom, while we said we were going to put farmers at the heart of our new international trade policy, we decided to do 2 trade deals, first of all with 2 of the biggest agricultural exporters in the world, Australia and New Zealand, and to give them total liberalisation over a 10 to 15 year period. So while the effects of that have not really come on tap yet, because they're very new, and they may not have negative effects for a while, it's clear that that's going to increase competition very significantly in the UK market for farmers. So that is a little bit of a snapshot of what some of the impacts have been so far. I don't think it's necessarily very helpful, actually, just to look at it as just the negative short-term impacts of Brexit. I think there are areas where there might be some longer-term, not necessarily benefits, but the effect, the negative impact may be lessened, or even areas where there may be a positive impact. And some of this really I put forward as food for thought, playing devil's advocate slightly, and just some of it even being a little bit provocative. But it's important, because too much of the debate really at home has been about, very much on one side or the other, and the details and the reality is likely to be a little more nuanced. So firstly, taking back control. That was the big slogan for the Brexiteers. We're going to take back control. Actually, farming is one of the areas where there has been some differences, changes in approach from the UK government. I mentioned the replacement for the Common Agricultural Policy schemes, the new environmental land management. It's been mishandled, but it is actually getting better. And it is something where the UK government, or the English government, and I won't go into the fact that agriculture has devolved, so this is being handled differently in 4 different nations. But all of them are doing things differently from the EU, and there's nothing to stop them from doing it right, for actually developing and implementing really good schemes that can incentivize sustainable farming for the future, helping farmers with the transition to net zero, etc. Nothing to stop them doing that. The fact they're not doing it very well is a problem with administration. Another area, we had the Precision Breeding Act go through Parliament recently, and we now regulate the approvals of gene-edited varieties, crops and the like in a different way to the EU, in a more innovation-friendly way, I would say. So there are areas where we can and have done things differently, and that's still possible. They, of course, have the potential to impact trade, so they have to be done thoughtfully, but you can do things differently. Now, secondly, related to that, sovereignty, another big buzzword around the referendum. We're going to take back our sovereignty. But really, this was about people not feeling that the decisions being made, and it was felt very acutely by farmers, were not really being made close enough to home. They were being made somewhere else, somewhere abroad even, by faceless bureaucrats. But whatever one thinks of that, the decisions are now very clearly being made back in the UK, back in Westminster, back in Parliament. And our politicians have to live and die by that. They can no longer pass the buck, which they were very, very good at. Constantly blaming things if we didn't like them. Oh, well, that was Brussels, nothing we can do about that. That has had to stop. And we felt that quite a lot recently. We didn't in London have the protests that happened here, happened indeed in Cardiff in Wales, because actually I think the dialogue between government and farmers was much more direct, and they felt that those decisions being made. I think it's very likely next week at the general election we might see the implications of decision-making coming back home and people not being able to pass the buck anymore. But we'll see what happens there. Final point, quickly, is actually the fact that it's still very early days. This was always supposed to be a long-term project. One thing you could hardly move in London for New Zealanders and Australians after the Brexit referendum telling us how to do things. New Zealanders in particular were very interesting because they went through very serious agricultural reforms in the 1980s. They devalued their currency and they removed support overnight. They all tell you, don't do it like that. Don't do it the way they did it. But most of them will say it was worth doing. Totally reformed and changed the way they farm. Took a long time to get there, but now they are pleased it happened. So you can do some quite serious reforms, and in the long term, those might have a benefit. And the UK has always been quite good at kind of preempting, this is a bit of a provocative point, but preempting big revolutions, getting it in early, and maybe escaping the sort of the worst that comes. So that's, I think, just some areas, just a bit of food for thought about where the impacts of Brexit might not be the sort of doom and gloom that some will paint it as. Final point, I've talked a lot about democracy and accountability there. So I think the last word can go to the British public. YouGov did a survey just a couple of weeks ago. They always do one on attitudes to Brexit. And what did they find? They found that only 13% of the British public now think that Brexit led to net positive outcomes. 53% now say Brexit led to a net negative outcomes. So you can take it from that what you will, whether the grass is greener on the other side. I think that says it all, but maybe only at least for now. It could change. Thank you very much. Thank you.